you have that vertical jump of that guy who in the NFL combine who squatted down really deep and he
Mm.
jumped really high.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is probably where the tendon is compliant. It's really the patellar tendon
Mm.
is extending a lot. And then you had that video of that Asian guy doing like a 5 foot drop jump.
Oh yeah.
And
Mhm.
yeah, and then he hopped up real quick. And I was thinking, is that where the tendon's very stiff and it's not actually elongating much?
That was Jake Tuura, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Thanks for being here. It's great to have Jake Tuura back as a guest on this week's podcast episode. Jake is an experienced coach and educator focusing on athlete hypertrophy, vertical jump development, and what he's well known for in his work in tendon science, rehab concepts, and performance training. Connective tissue is certainly critical in athletic movement and performance, and the science surrounding tendons and tendon properties is constantly evolving. On the show today, Jake talks about many concepts of tendon science, including animal tendon properties, age-related tendon changes, the latest in tendon stiffness versus compliance, as well as concepts on the collagen matrix. On the performance end, Jake links various training modalities as it relates to tendon adaptations, including isometrics, strength training, plyometrics, and more. It was great having Jake back on the podcast and looking forward to getting this episode going. Jake, man, it's great to have you back on the show. I'm excited to talk a lot of tendons and training application. But I did want to ask you a question about dunking and dunk videos. You were saying something about the difference before we pushed record about LA Fitness versus Lifetime gyms. And if people have videos from either gym, like there's something with the rim heights, or tell me a little bit of dunk experiences there. I'd be curious.
Yeah, so I think every LA Fitness I've been to, which maybe is in the I don't know, maybe 100 or so, they're all low rims. They're all like 9'10", 9'11" if it's bad, 9'9". But yeah, the lifetimes I've been to, they're all 10. So it's like, but I don't need to tell anyone. Maybe they know if they're in the dunk world, but you can kind of see those. I mean, if I'm getting up, I'm getting up. But yeah, LA Fitness, I always prefer LA Fitness, low rims, probably more sparing on your patellar tendon if it's painful
Mm,
because you don't have to jump as high. It's
that
just
is true.
like a low rim dunk session. So yeah, uh, LA Fitnesses, you got videos of people dunking there. They're probably going to be low rims.
Yeah, now that I think about it, I don't tend to see nearly as many if people post their dunks or whatever. I barely ever see any lifetimes in there. It's always LA Fitness. I was like,
I know, maybe it's
yeah,
cheaper too,
yeah.
because Lifetime could be like in the 100 plus, and LA Fitness is like 30 a month. So it's just cheaper. So you can go there. Anyone can pretty much go in there, but yeah, you don't see too many Lifetime videos. You see a lot of LA Fitness ones.
Yeah, there's something about that. I was gonna, I wasn't gonna mention this too, but I was curious. You said you were doing a lot of hunting in the off season. I'm sure, like, like I think you post like a fascia, like a video of the animal's fascia and stuff like that. And anything you take from hunting season, like you take some time off from training, or is there anything you kind of come back with after just spending time in the woods that makes anything new, or any new thoughts with that?
Well, I mean, that's just how I am. So we were talking about the podcast because I went on a spree of doing a bunch of podcasts, and now I haven't done a podcast in like a year or two. So it's just like I'll be all into something and then I'm all out. So hunting for me was bow season in Wisconsin, and that was like 3 months. That's all I pretty much did was hunting, and I felt obligated to go hunting because if I can get more deer, we had a bunch of deer tags. It's not just for me; it's for the family and my
Mm,
grandma and my
yeah.
sister. Everyone can get some meat. Um, but yeah, it was just a bunch of time off, and then I figured the horse tendons because
Mm,
the I've seen so many videos and research articles on the horse, the Achilles tendon of the horse, and I'm like, I don't have access to a horse carcass, so the closest is a deer. Although the difference, I guess, is the horse, they put most of their weight on the front legs, and the deer
mm,
puts most of their weight on the back legs. And the deer has a calcaneus on their back legs, and there's no
mm.
calcaneus on the front. But anyways, I got a few deer and we skinned the deer and we don't have any use of the lower shank because it's all just bone and tendon and there's
Yeah.
no meat in there. So yeah, I just cut up one of the tendons one day, so I could look at. I
Mm.
kind of knew what I was looking for, so I could kind of make out the collagen fascicles and then like the IFM gel that surrounded them. Um, yeah, and like that was pretty much it. I could have done more because there's some pretty good videos of people taking those, just tearing those tendons off
Mm.
and kind of making them into a rope. You can make it into a rope that you can use for other things because the tendon will dry out and it'll become a very stiff thing as the water kind of, I guess the water dries out of the tendon. But yeah, it was a cool thing because I've done a human cadaver in grad school, but
Mm.
that was before I cared about tendons, so I
Yeah.
just kind of went through the motions. So this one was cool to see what's going on in the deer Achilles after it was like just had been expired like a day prior.
Yeah, I know running in the woods, there's a fair amount of deer around here. And like when they get scared and jump away, like if they jump over something, I'm just like, you can't help but have a little bit of jealousy with how easily they do it. And
Yeah.
that
And those
unloading.
tendons,
Yeah.
they're so
Yeah.
long. Like
Yeah.
they're so long, the meat is so, or the muscle is so high up, and that tendon and then it has to bend around their calcaneus on the back. It's like, oh man, that it just makes you. We think of the human Achilles, and the human Achilles is pretty short comparable to
Yeah.
that. And the amount of Achilles issues we get, and we get a lot of those in the mid portion, and we say that it's like the the watershed. It doesn't get much blood flow and like overuse issues and whatnot. That I'm like, if these deer had these type of Achilles, like they would die so quickly because they
Yeah.
can't run. But maybe it's survival of the fittest. Those deer have died out, and the ones that we have are the ones who genetically have good tendons, good Achilles versus us. We just have a mismatch of everyone who has good Achilles, bad Achilles.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, it's crazy to see how long that thing is and how little blood flow it gets,
Mm.
and they're able to do what they do.
Yeah. It is. You think about too, like animals in the wild versus like racehorses, and like what the mechanism, like how many animals in the wild are going to get like, I don't even know how you'd know necessarily, like are going to get tendonitis. Just living a typical, like more variable movement. They're not putting the hammer down on anything on a regular basis, the kind of thing, versus, an animal that obviously has repeat actions and repeatability. And I know you said this too, like the horse who grew up getting to play all the time, like the tendons were way stronger and more robust. And I always just come back in my mind to like what like what nature intended. Like kids and they get to play all the sports and they're always doing free play out in the yard or with the other kids and stuff like that, and all the activities and how healthy that is versus things that are more compressed earlier. So you got me thinking now about like animals in the wild and that study you mentioned versus an animal that has to do a repeat thing. Because I guess you think too, like what's the difference between animals and humans? Like there's so many of us walking around with pains or issues, tendon issues, joint issues. And you could say that's doing too much of the same thing on one hand. And then what if we just played, but it wasn't too intense, and just all we needed to do? It's interesting to think about, at least.
Yeah, that. You ever read that tendon book, the Bowed Tendon book?
I don't
Have you
think
ever read
so.
that? Oh, that's my favorite. That's the best tendon book I read. It was on horses.
Oh,
Tom
cool.
Ivers wrote it. He died maybe 10, 20 years ago. It was so entertaining, such a
Mm,
good book. Like, and it pertains to every injury, strength coaches, athletic trainers
mm.
dealing with humans, because it's like all the issues the horse has are man-made issues.
Yeah.
Like the overshoeing and
Mm,
the training programs. Yeah. So there's a lot I need to learn still. I want to talk to a few horse people
mhm.
because a lot of those horses that race are really young and immature and like really hard to manage. I don't know what it would be comparable in humans. Maybe it would be like
Mhm.
trying to train a 12-year-old kid to run 100 meters or something. Like they're just they're hard to they're not mature in
Yeah.
their head. They're not mature in their head. So like I think that's a lot of the problems they have with the horses that they just can't train a lot of them. But yeah, that is a speculation. Is like how many tendon issues would they get in the wild? And I
Yeah.
think the horses would get them if they step in like a prairie, what is it, gophers, prairie, they have holes in the
Oh,
ground.
yeah, yeah.
So a horse could step in
Mm,
those, and get injured there. Like when I was hunting, I saw we have a bunch of turkeys around, and there was a turkey that looked like it had an injury to its Achilles. It was
Mm.
limping really bad, or maybe it was the muscle associated with the Achilles. And I saw it one day, and I'm like, that's probably dead by tomorrow because
Mm.
there's
Yeah.
bobcats around, and this
Yeah.
one was so far back. But I actually did see it the next 2, 3 days. I'm pretty sure it's dead now. So it's like
Mm.
these animals probably just get weeded out. If you injure your tendon, if a horse in the wild injures his tendon, that thing is probably dead.
Yeah.
And even the racehorses, I met a horse trainer a week ago, and I remember reading about the horses that would bow their tendons,
Mm.
and they'd say or rupture their tendons, so they'd just
Yeah.
say bow. And I'm like, why do they say they're dead? Why do they say that those horses are now dead? Like, and he's like, because they got to kill them.
Mm.
They got to kill them, or they got to turn them into something else,
Wow.
like a show horse, because it costs so much money to house them and feed them, that it's often just most cost effective to just be done with them. And it's hard when they rupture their tendons to keep them off of their tendon.
Yeah.
The horse always wants to keep pushing, and yeah, there's it's an interesting to look at. Some of the things don't pertain to humans though, because if we rupture our Achilles, we're probably going to have no problem laying off that thing. We're not
Yeah.
going to want to step on that leg.
Yeah. It's almost like an animal in the wild is much better off than a human in terms of at least chronic like tendon issues. Yeah, like you said,
Yeah,
outside of stepping in a hole or some other acute issues or things that happen suddenly. But then once you do get hurt, it's better off to be a human because you get to use your willpower and you're like, hey, or at least being like, hey, I need to have a graded recovery and work a little bit more slowly and things like that.
and I think the wild, like we talked earlier about, you asked me if I had knee pain again because I probably posted a few things about like my patellar tendon blowing up, and it's just my own fault of taking time off because I
Yeah.
had lat tendon surgery. I had a bunch of surgeries for my lat
Oh,
tendon
yeah.
complications, and then I went hunting for 3 months, so I didn't jump at all.
Oh, yeah.
I was in the it was winter, it was icy out, and then I go back to dunking and it blows up again. So it's like the man-made tendon issues are when you change things suddenly, and it's like my left patellar tendon, my body remembers that pain. So whenever I change things suddenly, it's probably going to manifest as left patellar tendon pain. Versus animals, like I'm watching these deer or turkeys, or they're moving every single day, and they're
Yeah.
jumping
Yeah.
away from
Exactly.
predators
Yeah.
every single day. They're getting consistent loads every day of their lives because they have to. And then I
Yeah.
just took 3 months off, and then I'm going to go dunk again. It's like there's no animal that is taking 3 months off of activity and then, oh, I got to hop this fence today. They just don't do it. So they're not getting the chronic tendon issues like we get.
Yeah, I think about that's something I think about a lot as well as like the variability. And I know I mentioned this briefly to you before the podcast, and I've talked about this before, like running in a creek bed with different surfaces and stuff. And I think about like an animal's foot is designed for whatever it's stepping on for the most part. And I think shoes are fine if you're running on the road. Like we have an artificial surface, have an artificial shoe. Like I think that's fine or whatever it is because like it's just not. It's just different. But barefoot shoes and natural terrain, it's like, okay, this is cool. I can feel how if I was doing this a lot, my body would just be incredibly robust. And so it's like animals are getting that constantly. And one of my main, I'd mentioned like, yeah, one of my main things I do to ward off Achilles issues. And funny enough, you mentioned your time off. When my daughter, she's a year old now, my youngest daughter, when she was born last year, I didn't do anything and it was cold. It was the winter, so I'm like doing literally nothing, almost no activity. My only activity was I had some sandbags in the garage, and I would just go in and make sure I do a few deadlifts, squats, and then clean and presses a few, once a day, at least do something. And my right Achilles, like the bursa actually, particularly, but the whole thing just blew it, like it swelled up, and I wasn't doing much. It's just like that inactivity, just like I don't know what it did. So. Yeah, my remedy these days is even more than ISO stuff, which is certainly it's absolutely helpful, but it's more like getting in good alignment, like a lot of the Bill Hartman ideas that I'm sure talked about some of them in the recent podcasts, and then just like a lot of variable movement, like discs and a lot of variability. So it's just like that nature, that variability. I feel like is such a I just think of that a lot, like natural environment. This is what's designed to keep your body moving. Intensification and specialization, and then you kind of got to weave between the two. Yeah. So
Yeah.
ever evolving equation.
The impossible balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So I do need to ask you this as well. Oh, I also just side note, I thought that was really fascinating what you said about the horse more weight in front and the deer in back. Because I don't spend a lot of time watching deer like move because either they if I see them, they're usually standing or they're running away from me for the most part. But horses are so interesting because like the weight in front, the way they hold their legs and walk is so different. Like the legs and back, like the shin angles are always positive. So like the foot's behind the knee, they're like ready to propel with that back leg. But then the front leg, every time they put a foot down, that knee straightens instantly to accept the load. It's like a very vertically accepting. And so I didn't realize that it was more weight bearing in front though, but I'm like, oh, that
It's
makes sense.
not, I think it's like 60-40.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not like a crazy
Yeah.
difference. And I was trying to figure it out, and they were saying that the deer is more, it's a biomechanical advantage. They're built in a better
Mm,
way than the horse. But I'm thinking too, look at how long the horse, their neck is, that like
yeah,
they have
that's
so
true.
much weight on their neck and their head, and a deer not as much. Although you could get a buck with a big neck and a, but it's not to the extent of a horse.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I don't know why they're built so differently like that. But yeah, I've watched some videos of horses running, and it's like that their hoof is just like looks like hyperextend. It looks so
Hmm.
bad. Like it's hitting the ground. It's like for us, it would be like us. It reminded me of us running. Like if our toes were to strike the ground first, and then like everything would kind of collapse. It just looks so nasty, and that's like the way that the horse is running. Um, yeah, does not look good, but it's crazy. You look down there, it's like it's all fascia and tendon.
Hmm.
That's all
Yeah.
that's down there. And it's like it's okay. It's okay dealing with that. And look at the regenerative capacity of all that. It is so poor. There's hardly any blood flow or exchange of nutrition, but it somehow does its job for the length of that animal's life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so interesting to watch and even think about too. Like if there's like a fast, agile human being, other people might say that person runs like a deer, and that would be a good thing. If I've never really heard anyone say, "Oh, you run like a horse," and that'd be like, you sometimes you say this person is a horse because they're like, they're a workhorse. They can handle a lot of work. Like it's more of like a capacity thing when that's described, but usually it's not a positive that we found to tell someone they run like a horse. So it's interesting to think about how that comes along. Although, I mean, horses run, it is amazing. I mean, I like watching like horses and like even like the motor learning stuff in horse training is really cool to me because you can't cue, and you have to, there's a lot of other ways to get the horse to run, properly, or even like crossfiring. Like crossfiring is like when the wrong legs sequence is happening and but sometimes it's not necessarily something you have to teach the horse how to do. It's like could be like a stress thing, like there was too much stress or they didn't get to play enough or whatever. It's almost like give the horse more GPP and time, and then they'll figure out how to uncrossfire. To at least some people have
Yeah.
said that, but yeah, I find it interesting. Maybe I'll retire someday and train horses. That might be my wife has said something about that. It'd be fun thing in the later years. But hey, I got to ask you, Jake. So I had Derek Hansen on recently. He had mentioned he was talking to you with the Achilles uptick and the NFL especially, and people are I mean, is that statistically significant? Sometimes you see injury curves and it's like it was up here. I don't know why. Maybe it was just an aberration, but it does seem like there's a lot. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think there's anything do you think it is a thing? Do you think there's pieces that could be contributing to that? What's your take on
Yeah, it
Achilles
does
uptick?
seem like there's more, but I tried to go back in the research, and the tracking is weird. It's
Hmm.
like some years they took off and you only have data from like I forget, but and then also you go way back and I'm like, did they just not report some of them?
Yeah.
Like maybe they didn't report them.
Hmm.
And if you're an athlete, maybe you don't want that reported because who's
Yeah.
going to want to pick you up post Achilles? So I feel like nowadays they're reporting all of them. They're probably reporting all of them. But yeah, I met Derek in Fort Worth at, I think it was
Hmm.
NS or CSCCA
Yeah.
conference. And yeah, we talked for a bit. He just walked into a Starbucks, and I was like, dude, I've been paying attention to the Achilles. So we just had a little talk
Yeah.
on Achilles, and then we had the podcast. And yeah, he's done more looking into that. I think I've kind of been confused. So I've been like, oh, okay, I'm done trying to look at if there is an uptick because the data just seems inconsistent.
Yeah.
But the lockdown thing was like so obvious when the NFL lockdown
Mm,
happened, and
yeah.
they had instead of whatever it was, I'm gonna get the time wrong, but 12 weeks of physical preparation, and then they just had like 1 week of physical preparation. So you don't know what these guys were doing back home. And you had whatever the number was, like 12 Achilles ruptures in the first
Hmm.
week versus like they usually never had any. So I think maybe that just speaks to the peaks and the valleys idea that you just had a big valley and now you have a peak of loading and then snap the Achilles goes. Like, could that be as simple as it is
Hmm.
that you just don't have consistent loading and then the thing goes? And I don't know if that's happening nowadays. I mean, you do a lot more like load management and
Hmm.
taking time off and stuff, and it's like, is that the right thing? And I don't know. Is it the right thing or is it not? Maybe it's the right thing. Maybe it makes me think too. Maybe that's the right thing for like um the hamstrings or like things that have a regenerative
Yeah.
capacity. Like maybe you take time off and you get less muscle injuries, but maybe that time off increases tendon injuries. I don't know. uh I wish we could classify things better.
Yeah.
Like load management is good. Load management is good, and we're getting less quad strains and we're getting less hamstring injuries and muscle type things. But what is the effect on tendons?
Yeah.
I just there's no answer for that. Maybe it's a bad thing. Maybe load management is bad for tendons. Maybe it just needs consistent load day after day. Because that I think that is the thing. Even if you have kind of a tendon that's like a little bit painful with activity, just keep doing it. Keep doing it every day. You're fine. The worst thing you can do is completely take it away and then try to hop back in. I think
Yeah.
it's going to blow up, or maybe it's going to have a serious injury.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think with those multifactorial things, being able to draw things definitively, like that 2020 underloading, and then what you see, I think that's like the valuable place to start, and then you can look into more like piecing in other pieces. As to what you just said, though, this is something that's thrown me for a loop the last few years, and maybe not like injury prevention and rehab so much as just training and unloading and reloading and rest intervals is thinking about. I mean, we all, those of us who went to, exercise physiology in undergraduate, if you did exercise science or whatever, you read a textbook about undershoot and overshoot. You train the muscle. There's like little rips in the muscle, and then it fills itself in and gets bigger. But it's like, okay, well, you can squat every day. Like any training program, you're doing some muscular activity every day. But it's like, to me, it seems like recovery, especially with intense speed and power and jumping, would almost be more driven by the state of whatever the connective tissue, the tendon, like the body's sensing, okay, like here's the state of the tendons and connective tissues. And if you keep doing this thing over and over again, it would strike me that with more injuries, a lot of times, especially impact stuff happening at those tissues, those elastic and connective tissues, that plays a big role in how the body deciding to give you a certain amount of energy in a certain day. And even like how we taper for like in track, like if you're tapering a 10-day taper and you think I'd be interested in seeing too, like what connective tissue changes get you in the right zone. And then too, like if you don't do enough in that time, maybe your connective tissues and tendons get too like loose or compliant or stiff or what, or not stiff it would be, but it would be too compliant. But it's interesting to think about that. I mean, I guess maybe it's one of those nerdy things that maybe you probably don't need to think about that too much, but I do think it's definitely more than just the muscle, which we're always told, it's definitely those tissues playing in.
Yeah, and it's like the tendon doesn't have, it's not a contractile tissue, so it's like that central nervous system involvement is with the muscle, but then you have the Golgi tendon organ that can kind of, I don't know if it's like, I don't know if you ever gone for a dunk and it's like your legs just got like a flat tire thing?
Yeah,
Like
I've had those.
you're going to jump, yeah, you're going to jump and then your legs just like kind of just don't work and you just kind of fall over to the next step. And it's like, I wonder if that's like a GTO thing, like Golgi tendon organ thing, like your body just senses we're not ready for this. So yeah, I don't know what's going on. That is an interesting thought. I don't know what's going on with the connective tissues and like the readiness level. Um, but I kind of, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always just thinking, I think maybe it just comes from some of those sessions. A lot of them in my mid 30s, especially where my system just wasn't recovering as quickly as it did in my mid 20s. And I'd go to I would think I'm in a great place for like a jump session on a given day. And then I'm jumping like 2 or 3 inches worse. And I'm like, it's almost like I'm asking my brain, why did you decide to downregulate my system? Like today, like what was going on that the body said, we're not going to go in this direction. We're going to go in the other direction. Is it?
Yeah. So you're thinking is it not a muscle thing and is
Yeah.
it a tendon thing?
Yeah, like what does the
Yeah.
brain pick up that says for the sake of your body's safety, we choose not to adapt in this, upwards or
Mm.
even neutral direction. We're going to take you. And yeah, there's a lot of other like life events and things happening as well, but I would always think why, when an athlete has a bad day or you go to dunk and you're just not getting up, like what did the body pick up that it decided not to give you that, like, I just call it like the juice, like the electricity, the nervous system output that would allow you to do those things. That's like that foundational component of it all. So my questions of, myself when I'm like, when it's kind of like, one of those days, but yeah, man,
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever have the exact answer. Yeah. So I did want to ask you, okay, so yeah, I know some of these training nebulous. I want to get away from my own nebulous training questions that don't have an answer. So let's talk about something that's a little more solid and concrete. And you've been having some really cool posts on Instagram lately in terms of tendon stiffness. And this is funny too, because it's almost like we throw out the term stiffness, like, oh yeah, you got to have stiff ankles to sprint faster. It's like stiffer is automatically better, like whatever in being an athlete. So what's your thoughts on the relationship of tendon stiffness versus compliance or a longer, stretchier rubber band, performance and injury risk? Very open-ended question, but wherever you want to start with that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I've I thought I figured things out many times and then it was challenged like and then I'm in a weird state with it all. So I think um I was kind of maybe one of the first papers I read that kind of really summed up things well was Gerard McMahon's No Strain No Gain, where it talked about pulling on the tendon, straining the tendon. Hopefully this
Mm,
answers the question at the end of this whole talk. I,
sure.
I don't really know where it's going, but tendon strain is like how much it elongates when the muscle is pulling on it. And he talked about training. You have to train in a way where the muscle's working so hard where it actually strains the tendon.
Mm,
The tendon gets pulled on, and then the tendon the cells have a response to get stiffer. So like if you pull on the tendon, let's say 10% of its resting length, which is a pretty big pull on a tendon, the tendon has this adaptation where the cells kick out more collagen. It lays down the collagen, the tendon gets stiffer. So it's pretty much like any time your muscle would be pulling on the tendon, you're gonna probably be getting a stiffer tendon, which is good because you don't want the tendon to just be um, like if you want the muscle to keep pulling harder and harder, giving more output for movement, you need the tendon to get stiffer and stiffer. Otherwise, you're just not going to be capable of having more outputs. So it just seems like stiffness is everything, but then it's like, well, is too much stiffness bad? Like, what if
mhm,
the tendon gets so stiff where it can't extend? It can't extend
mhm.
anymore. It can only stretch 8% of its resting length.
Yeah.
And like, is that a case where then the tendon becomes more brittle or something, or like it might
Mhm,
snap easier? I just don't know. But this thought I found Tony Blazevich had a
mhm.
paper. It was sent to me by Johan Lottie. Is that his name?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you know him?
Yes,
Yeah, he
yes.
he he sent that paper to me, and I had never seen it. I think it was on a flywheel. But I was under this impression that the harder the muscle pulls on the tendon, the more the tendon strains, the more it elongates. But there was this paper by Blazevich where they did a flywheel, like they jerked. There was like a jerking motion, and the tendon didn't really strain much at all when they had such a high muscle effort and there was a jerking motion. So he said when you have, and I use this
Mm.
example, I extrapolated it to a vertical jump, which is probably wrong, but I just did. It's like a personal diary for me. I'm like, this is just going to help me
Mm,
understand it. You have that vertical jump of that guy who in the NFL combine who squatted down really deep and he
mhm.
jumped really high.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is probably where the tendon is compliant. It's really the patellar tendon
Mm.
is extending a lot. And then you had that video of that Asian guy doing like a 5 foot drop jump.
Oh, yeah.
And
Mhm,
yeah, and then he hopped up real quick. And I was thinking, is that where the tendon's very stiff and it's not actually elongating much? You know what I'm saying?
mhm,
So I'm like, it was just based off that paper though, because before I read that paper, I would have thought the drop jump would have been way higher extendability of the
mm,
tendon
yeah.
and the other jump would have not. But I'm just questioning that right now. Uh, or ever since I read that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I think it probably depends on the task. Like if you're doing that drop jump like the Asian guy, you want the tendon to be super
Hmm.
stiff versus if you're doing the deep bending jump, you want the tendon to be compliant. So it probably depends on the
Yeah.
what you're doing, the task you're doing, or it depends on the type of athlete. Like if you're a very
Hmm.
stiff athlete, you probably want stiff tendons. If you're a very an athlete that wants to use big excursions of joint ranges of motion, you probably want the more compliant tendon. And I kind of was looking at like Blake Griffin, Kobe, a lot Vince Carter, these guys who are dunking at like 40 years old.
Yeah.
And it's like, sure, you could say that they had a bunch of injuries and they changed their jumping style. Because when you have injuries, you don't want to
Hmm.
bend as much and you don't want to bend your joints after you've been injured a ton of times. But they don't bend as much.
Hmm.
Like they still dunk, but they're so stiff. Their knees don't bend as much, their hips don't bend as much. Basically the knees. So like their I'm thinking their patellar tendons are not as compliant. And it makes sense to me because the IFM gel within the tendon, the fluid within the tendon, that's what keeps the tendon able to extend. And the IFM gel starts to dry up when you're like 30, 40.
Yeah.
So the tendon's going to stay stiff, but it's not going to be as extendable. So it's not going to be able to strain as much. So I would think everyone would adopt a more stiff movement strategy. You can still dunk and you can still do the things you did before. You're just not going to be as, your tendons are just not going to be as extendable. So what does it mean for training? And I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, how do you maintain IFM gel? How do you extend extendability with the tendon? I have no clue
Hmm.
still to this day, and I probably get it asked. I get it asked pretty frequently. But yeah, I don't know if that answered the question at all. But I think it depends. The stiffness and compliance thing is like you look at a movement that's stiff. I think the tendon's stiff. You
Yeah.
look at a movement that's more compliant or elastic. I think that's a more compliant tendon.
Yeah.
I think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
I might say the opposite in a week if I read something else.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what's going on, I guess, externally. And when I say that, I mean, like, what's the ground contact time total? Like, it's the sum of the whole system versus internally. Okay, every little joint, every rotation. But what you're saying makes sense. I remember this was back when I was in graduate school. I was doing research for some project, and one of my studies I cited was saying that in sprinters versus slower runners, that vastus lateralis or outer quad the tendon was more compliant. So a more compliant tendon led to a faster. I mean, it wasn't because of that. That was, I'm sure the tendon just adapted, to whatever they were doing. But it makes sense. It's like big range of motion. You have watch that foot go and watch how much bend is happening when that heel comes up towards your butt as the leg cycles through. So that's obviously if you have a really stiff tendon, you probably can't do that and get that power swing as the leg snaps down and then cycles down towards the ground. And so if you just watch the leg of a sprinter, you see that range and extensibility. But then on the other hand, like an Achilles in a drop jump, it's probably got to be a lot stiffer for the most part. And I think Anthony Blazevich, I may have asked him that on the first podcast he was on, or it was a email I sent him. I forget. But I think he had said something similar because he's been doing research on that for a long time. And it was something like to the tune of the muscles each have their own job and they're going to adapt as they should. But then, yeah, like you said, well, what does it mean for training? I mean, I guess the thought would only be, well, if I'm slow, and because I've thought about this with like stuff like oscillatory isometrics at the muscle length and stuff like that. Well, if I'm slow, maybe some of these movers that have to go over a longer range should be more extensible. Like maybe I should train like lunge drops and stuff where my, even like rear foot elevated like drops where you're having like that extensible range and stuff like that. So. But other than that,
Yeah.
I don't know. You get what you train for, right? Like, so it's
I know, and then you probably have the thing too where it's like, do you want to train the opposite?
yeah,
If
exactly.
you're like
Yeah,
if you're a stiff, yeah, if you're very stiff, like if you take 40-year-old Vince Carter dunking, do you want to keep doing stiff things? That's usually when you would do the more bigger range of motion with an older person to
yeah,
maintain like
healthy.
mobility or
Yeah,
flexibility, you know?
or to keep him healthy, I guess, right? Because if I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
it's just him going out probably and hey, go dunk. I mean, I'm sure he probably still plays and stuff, but wouldn't you think if you're older and you do start to, the tendons, like Bill Hartman talks about, like the body starts to dry up. I hate that term. It's like, yeah, I'm in my 40s now, so it's like, but like, it's like a nocebo if I actually think about it. But in terms of like Angus Ross had said this, that as you get older, your stride length and your stride rate in sprinting, your frequency stays the same. It's the stride length that decreases, which makes sense because, well, it just, you could say it's the whole system, but if the system's less hydrated and it's more stiff, and that includes the tendons, then it's kind of harder to, throw that stride length out there.
Yeah.
Perspective,
And
perspective.
this has been, so I think we haven't talked for like 2 years, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, a year and a half, I think.
So I did a show with Hazel Screen
Oh, cool.
on the interfascicular matrix. And because all this is so hard for me to grasp, if you think of the tendon, like the ropes within the tendon, if you think of them from starting at the muscle and going all the way to the bone, you'd be like those ropes, like when we're talking about extendability, like how does that work? How does that work when we say the tendon's drying up and it becomes less extendable?
Yeah.
Like the rope is connecting end to end. And she thinks they don't. So she's like one of the few that, and all her work is the interfascicular matrix. So she thinks maybe some of the fascicles connect to end, but a lot of them are like starting at the muscle and then they run out. And what's holding the tendon together is the IFM gel. The IFM gel is holding all the collagen fascicles together. So when the gel dries up, the extendability goes away of the tendon. So this makes a whole lot more sense that they're not continuous. The collagen fascicles are not continuous from the calcaneus to the calf muscle. Like those, they would have to, they're so tiny, they would have to be so long. So it's more like they're all held together by this. I guess sometimes the gel is stiff and sometimes the gel is more compliant. But that makes a whole lot more sense for me that the tendon is no longer extendable when that gel starts to dry up because it kind of just shrinks, you know? It kind of just shrinks versus if you have the standpoint that it's just collagen fascicles. Collagen fascicles don't really extend a whole lot.
Yeah.
Like their strain is very minimal. And the collagen fascicles have this helical rotation, which then is again more extendability. And the helical angle decreases as you get older because the gel's drying up and it becomes like more linear. So it is the drying up, the Bill Hartman thing. I remember, I love that he said that it's like the tendon is drying up, so the extendability is going away. But if I was thinking it was the collagen fascicles end to end, it still didn't make sense to me. But now that makes a whole lot of sense that it's the gel drying up and the gels keep holding everything together. And that's why it doesn't extend as much.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Just Fly Sports online courses, Elastic Essentials and Sprint Acceleration Essentials. These courses are CEU certified and will expand your viewpoint on explosive athletic performance and skill acquisition. You can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab and join the hundreds of other coaches who have already jumped in. Again, you can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab to get started. So you're saying like within the tendon itself, basically I think about like expansion and compression. If something's expanded, it has a lot of movement potential, like I think like potentially kinetic energy. And so you're saying like as the tendons dry up with age or whatever, that space in the tendon actually gets smaller because the gel, like I have my hands, if people are listening on audio, they can't see my hands are like contracting down.
Well, I don't think the tendon, so because then you would probably be able to measure the cross-sectional area or the thickness and see it get smaller, but I don't think that happens either.
Okay.
So something weird is happening with the water. And I think the collagen, like, so the gel is made up of proteoglycans, which proteoglycans are the water loving, quote unquote. So like they're the ones that suck in all the water. And that's the proteoglycans are the gel that is surrounding all the collagen fascicles. So collagen is like, what's it called? Hydrophobic. Like it doesn't want to really be around. I'm probably going to butcher this, but that's like collagen is like dry. It's like a dry, but as the gel dries up, as you get older, it's like more of that water goes more around the collagen for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know it's this weird thing that's going on, but that elastic gel is kind of withering away and somehow that water's going. So I don't think you could say that the tendon is shrinking like that. It's maybe that the water is moving to a different place. And yeah. And it's in a way where it's not. So like the analogy they use is the tibialis anterior tendon, and that's a tendon that is not an energy storage tendon like the Achilles. So like the Achilles, let's just say it could strain maybe 20%. The tibialis anterior can only strain like 4% before it would rupture. And that tendon is like a linear tendon. It just goes. The collagen fascicles don't have this helical rotation. There's not a significant interfascicular matrix gel in there. It's just like a a rod. It's like a rod type tendon.
Mm,
It doesn't have this helical, none of that stuff. So the Achilles tendon becomes more like the tibialis anterior tendon with age because it starts to dry up and it becomes more linear.
mm,
And as that happens, you're not as good at putting load to different collagen fascicles. You're not as good at dissipating certain loads. It's all just like you're yanking on the tendon, and the collagen fascicles
mm.
have to take it. So you're going to overload the tendon much, much more quickly because there's not that compliance of the tendon.
Yeah.
That's my understanding, at least right now.
Yeah, a little less wiggle in there. Well, I'll tell you before my in terms of what to make of this practically, which I do want to actually ask you some questions, maybe not 100% related to what we just said, but I do want to get into some practical pieces with some isometrics. But if nothing else, I'm going to visualize my tendons being hydrated. The gel is hydrated; it's expanding in the tendons. But I do think about that a lot, even from a training perspective. Being elastic as you get older, I do think about, you can't help but think about Kadiraziani and like all the dynamic stretchy stuff he does. And to me, if I did that to a T, I feel like it'd be a little excessive. But even like, the leg, like the dynamic leg swings, like just have a hurdle or just a stick and he's crazy with it. He'll like swing his leg up and over the stick. And I think, as Bill would say, there's a lot of orientations going on with getting that leg over the stick.
Yeah,
but outside of the orientations, I do wonder in terms of the nature of the tendon itself and just maintaining a level of elasticity with that. I've definitely started to do a lot more. Also, just in the cold. I mean, it's freezing here. It's even colder where you're at now in Minnesota. But like training mostly in the basement now. I did go outside and run yesterday, but just doing like different like leg swings, trying to keep like it's more expansive. It's more external rotation, like swinging your leg. And so I wonder how that would impact tendon and tendon health over time as well, or just for like general, too. But then it's almost like, well, okay, if you're aging well, okay, the hip and maybe the knee, we want that to go through big ranges repeatedly. But what about like the foot and Achilles and calf? Like, I don't. It doesn't strike me that you'd really want to stretch that out a lot. Like, maybe
Yeah.
I like thinking about doing more like spinny rotational stuff, like spirally, like the balance discs and stuff. But yeah, I don't know what that exactly has to. I'm kind of deviated, but that's just my own brain dump in terms of extensibility as you move through your athletic career.
I know, and I try to marry it with the structure. So like the tendon structure is pretty, I guess it's pretty well understood. There's so much stuff you can read on tendon structure, but it's like the stiffness of the tendon is from the collagen fascicles, the stiffness of the tendon. The extendability is the proteoglycan matrix, and then elastin. What goes along with that is elastin. And it's like we know how to make the tendon stiffer with collagen synthesis by doing pretty much whatever activity. But then I'm like, what is the activity to get elastin synthesis, and what is the activity to get proteoglycan synthesis so that you have more? I don't know what it is. And then there's weird things where if you injure the tendon, it does become more compliant. You get more elastin in there. So like you produce all these things but you don't want to injure your tendon. But that's what happens when you injure it, is it becomes more compliant. So it's like you get this surplus of all of this gel and all this elastin, but maybe it's not useful. I just don't know. So yeah, I try to look at that, and I just don't know what the things are. It could just be as simple as like, if you're getting stiffer with age, your tendon is getting stiffer. Let's do the compliant things, and maybe that is the big ranges of the motion. And yeah, a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I wonder too. It makes me think about like the anecdote of an athlete who's been working hard, especially track and field. You see it a lot. Athlete, they're a little overtrained. They get hurt. They go to rehab. They probably stop lifting heavy for the most part. They aren't doing their running and jumping and stuff, and they're grading back into that. And then it's a bunch of like, usually it's like balancy stuff in the weight room or the rehab room, and just stuff that gives you a lot of awareness. But I also think, which I think is really good, I think to actually step back for a minute and really be aware of all the little muscles and what your body's actually doing, I think is good for anybody. But then also, I wonder if you trained your tendons to a point of too much stiffness, if that, like you're just grinding it out in the weight room, you're straining on the track or whatever your sport is too. You could say other sports. And then you take a step away for a bit. And like you mentioned, you just made me think about this, because if you had a little injury, like it just maybe that looseness in some cases, maybe they needed a hit. Your body needed a hit of that for whatever reason. Yeah, so I'm always thinking about
Oh,
injury
okay,
too, man.
yeah,
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 like I always was, how
yeah.
can we make injury a good thing? What are all the things your body needed when you got hurt? So maybe there's something there if that ever, if tissues ever get too much, and then it's a place to see that in action. But I always know for me, this always was very common in my 20s. Every time I would just take a week off of the weight room or 2 weeks, my stride length on the track, I'd be doing like buildups with the track team. It's like, man, I feel so much bouncier. Like, and that's, yeah, just that like compliance and external rotation, I think, coming around a little bit, more than anything in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting thought. The benefit too with the pain, like mostly everyone that reaches out has tendon pain for me. And it's like I want people to think of tendon pain as a positive thing
Hmm.
because like all the ruptures, well not all of them, but Colin Griffin calls it silent tendinopathy, which is so good. Like the people have a really bad tendon in the first place, but they have no pain and then they go on to rupture. So it's like just your body putting pain there is a
Hmm.
good thing.
Yeah.
It's telling you, it's like it's a healthy response that
Yes.
you have pain here. Like let it go through the healing process, which that whole process when I said it gets injured, it becomes more compliant. I look at it almost like I called it the second childhood like a long time ago. Like your tendon goes through this childhood where it's a really compliant structure full of a lot of cells and gel. And then it starts to lay down all this stiff collagen so that you can have higher outputs as you get older. But then you injure your tendon and it comes back to the second childhood. So it produces all these cells and this gel
Hmm.
again. It becomes
Interesting.
this compliant structure. But then you need to respect that healing process because that
Hmm.
takes many months to get back to that structure that's kicked all that excess stuff out of the tendon, and now it's back to this really strong collagen with just enough gel and enough elastin. So that pain response is like you have this pain in this tendon if it's lasted for like you have to respect the many months process where it's gonna reorient the structure
Hmm.
and give it the loads that it wants. But it's those people that get no pain they often go on to rupture and
Hmm.
it kind of like comes out of nowhere and it's like if you had done an ultrasound of that tendon you probably would have seen it was real bad looking. I like when they say crab meat,
Hmm.
like the crab meat when like the ends of the meat are like frayed like mop ends. That's what a lot of the tendons that rupture look like they just are unhealthy before they even go on to rupture. So yeah, the pain is not enjoyable, but
Yeah.
people should reframe it as a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was even thinking about that yesterday. I was out. I have to run on the roads about 3/4 of a mile to get to this 80-meter hill that I do intervals on and then more jogging and stuff. And I was literally a quarter mile from my house. That I mentioned that ankle that the bursa blew up when my daughter was born. Like some just randomly out of nowhere, just start like in the inside, just kind of shooting like little shooting pain. And I was like, come on now, this isn't like what's going on. And in my own brain, I'm like, I'm not hurt. What is this pain signal telling me? And so no, I'm not saying this is a recommendation for anyone, but I stopped. I did like, because I know my right foot doesn't pronate as well as my left does. So I did like some feet flat on the ground, like knee circles, different ways to kind of get some internal rotation going. Like I think I might have did some lateral iso, like lunge things. Did a little bit of that and then started like shuffling out of it and it was fine. And then I eventually ran and sprinted and it was totally fine the whole rest of the run. And so it's like, what was my body telling? And it's fine today. It feels great. But it's just interesting because I think like, what was my body telling me there? What was the message? I think the message was that ankle is a little compressed. It's not internally rotating. And if you keep doing this workout on that, it's going to screw you up. Like, so it's like, it was like this message. And I'm like, okay, I got the message. This is what I need to do. And then I'll grade out of it. And then it was okay, but it's just, I wonder if myself 10 years ago, I may have just shut down that workout. I don't know. It's interesting to think about why your brain is sending you that, and you think of it as a blessing, and I'm rock climbing now too. So it's like my fingers will sometimes get a little toasty and, it's like you're constantly like, okay, like how many more climbs can I do here? What should what should I do?
I get that a bit more global how my dunk is left right, my natural
Mm-hmm.
dunk is left right, and if my left knee is the one that has been hurting like the last many years, so I just go right left dunk
Mm-hmm.
and I'm fine. So like the big plant is with the right leg, that's my healthy, the one that doesn't hurt, and then the left one just kind of finishes my jump off and I'm
Mm-hmm.
fine. So it's like that's a more global thing. I like if my left patellar tendon is hurting, I'm not going to do a left right plant. That's going to blow that thing up so bad. So I can just jump the opposite style and I'm fine. Um, but I was wondering with your thing, you said it's on the medial side of your Achilles.
Yeah, or the pain was showing up. I want to say in that run particularly, the pain was in the back, and I want to say it was showing up on the inside. Yeah, back and inside aspects of it, and that's where like the
Oh,
bursitis kind of is.
okay.
So, you know.
Because there was some. Have you heard of the plantaris?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, I've heard about that with the yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I wonder. I don't know too much about it. It's just really fascinating to me that
Hmm.
you have this really long tendon that's really
Yeah.
not
So
not
weird.
useful at
Such a
at all for
weird little.
anything.
It's like the
And it,
appendix of the lower leg, although the appendix does do something.
and it's like it can be. I think it can be oriented in like four different spots.
Mm,
It can be like almost inside the Achilles, or it can be in the sheath, or it can be outside. And Jared Amflet called it like a what's that metal wire that they like decapitated heads with? That's
like
what he was
karate.
calling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it's really bad in a really bad spot, it can kind of have that effect on the
Mm,
Achilles tendon. And people, there's been a lot of stories, I guess I've heard from Achilles
yeah.
researchers where, yeah, they've tried good rehab and they've tried everything, and then they'll just go in and
Yeah.
take the plantaris out, and then the person's better. So yeah, it could be overlooked. I think, and back in the day, they thought not many people had plantaris, but I think now they say like, I think they say mostly everyone has one in them.
Hmm.
And it can really cause issues just based on where it's oriented in a
Interesting.
person.
You know what? I think it must have been on your podcast. Somebody was, I think I remember this so well. You mentioned it. I was driving to a track meet. I think it was your podcast or maybe it was someone else's on tendons, but it was on that plantaris piece and how when that muscle got cut, a lot of people's had resolution. And I remember driving this track meet and I'm like, I want to forget this whole thing because I like this, like the intercellular matrix and the fluid, dehydration. These are things that I actually literally just don't want to think about because I feel like if I get obsessed with thinking about that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it is a thing for me, but I was like, I know if I obsess over this, it's not going to help me push forward. So I just had to like forget it until you said it again there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's probably not applicable for a lot of people. It's like with the knee that I've heard stories of the
Yeah.
plica with the knee, how like people can try conservative
Mhm.
management and they think they have patellofemoral pain or patellar tendon or something, and it just doesn't work for years, and then they go and do surgery and they cut it out and the person's relieved and they're better.
Mhm.
And it's like I love those stories, but you have hundreds of thousands of people getting surgery for their plica and
Mhm.
they don't get better.
Yeah.
Probably just like with plantaris, they get it cut out. And that wasn't the issue in the first place. They just
Yeah.
had like a regular Achilles tendinopathy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's usually why like the conservative approach is always best. So let's try to get the loading right, get the metabolic environment good, and see where you're at after many months.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially too, the more I've like gotten down the biomechanics rabbit hole, had Bill on a couple podcasts this past year. I just think it's like that's to me becomes such the first hurdle to clear in so many situations. It's just like, is our joints rotating correctly? Are things moving the way they should? At least and I feel it's the easiest too, because in terms of like, like a little ultrasound to like, go, hey, I mean, to me, it is fascinating. I would love to see, I know in the pros, I think they have like they're measuring tendons pretty regularly, aren't they? Like that's become a bigger thing.
Yeah,
So
that's Jared's doing. Yeah, with a lot of NBA teams.
yeah.
Because the thing is, if the tendon is healthy, and this is not applicable to anyone unless you're getting your tendons in. Even ultrasound's not it because it depends on the
Hmm,
operator. If you get different operators, you're probably gonna get
interesting.
different ultrasound. So he has that device that they use. They started with horses, the ultrasound UTC scanner, and yeah, you could look at tendons every 6 weeks, I guess. And if that tendon is healthy, the patellar and Achilles, because they're straight tendons. You can't look at any other ones. They're not going to rupture. If they're healthy, they're not going to rupture.
Hmm.
So, like all the people that are going to rupture have unhealthy tendons in the first place.
Yeah.
They just probably don't know it because the pain signal is not it's not working. It's not working to get them to offload and rehab. They're just performing. And actually, those people that are performing with a very compromised patellar tendon, you can probably watch them play and see that they're not cutting off that side or they're not jumping off
Interesting.
that side or they're not landing. Like your body
Hmm.
probably is not going to move in a way where it's using all of how can it? how can it use your patellar tendon if it's super compromised? It probably just takes like a lot of video watching to see that, or you could
Mm,
just scan their tendon and see, okay, this thing is real unhealthy. Let's try to get it. And then what's the way he gets them healthier is like they're really heavy isometrics, really heavy lifting because
mm.
that's gonna reorient the viscous movement of the tendon is
Yeah.
gonna reorient things, get it healthier.
Yeah, that's actually the question I wanted to ask you is like updated thoughts in light of all this stiffness and compliance, and people have isometric protocols and things. I did just want to quickly say I do find that fascinating. It's like the athletes, like how can you still move and perform, but it's just like just those subtle little twists out of positions or subtly avoiding. It's fascinating to me how an athlete who knows they need to get out and do this thing can even like shut off the pain signals and the body just figures out that way. But then you're like riding the line, right? So to me, the psychology of even how the brain operates to put someone in one state versus like, okay, I do feel pain versus I feel too much pain and I can't, get anywhere at all. Like it's so fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had anything on that, I'd be curious. But otherwise, I wanted to ask you about, okay, like protocols, like, all right, 30-second ISO holds and, oh no, or 3-second ISO holds or 5-minute ISO lunge.
Yeah, yeah.
What's up with that? Because we talked a lot of a lot of theoretical stuff, a lot of training stuff too. But like I really want to get into some meat and potatoes of like, okay, here's some training routes people go with for these things, and maybe if we had those three buckets: 5-minute lunge, 30-second,
Yeah, okay.
and then
Yeah.
3-second. What do you got there for training
So
application?
I think it all comes back to strain. Although maybe I'll question that at the end here, but strain, so like elongation of the tendon, because the only way you change the tendon is the cells within the tendon responding to some mechanotransduction, some mechanical signal, the cells within the tendon. So you have to pull on the tendon to get the cells to get pulled on, and then the cells kick out the collagen. So it depends on strain. So if
Mm,
your tendon is at its, if your Achilles tendon right now is at its resting length, so that would be like 0%. If you stretch it 2%, that's probably not enough strain because the tendon is surrounded by it's surrounded by a sheath and a peritent.
mm,
It's surrounded by so many different
mm,
layers where the cells are the cells that you want to hit are within the collagen matrix, and they're really hard to pull on. So like they're so deep within the tendon, so you really have to pull on the entire tendon really far to even get some signal within those cells. So you have to pull on the tendon really hard. So this depends on strain. So it depends on the joint angle, and then how much the muscle's pulling. So I think Gerard McMahon had it for the patellar tendon where tendon strain, I think his equation was the starting joint angle plus the muscle torque plus the co-contraction of the hamstrings. So I just used it and I said, if you're doing like a leg extension, let's say you're doing a leg extension, go to the mid range, so you're in a
mm,
decent joint angle where the tendon's a little bit stretched, and then load it as heavy as you possibly can, so the quad is pulling super hard on the tendon, and that is straining the tendon. So if you did that exercise and you did a 5-minute hold, I know we like the ISO lunge, but
oh
let's
yeah.
just use this because it's
Mm,
easier to understand. A 5-minute hold, you would be using such a light weight. It would have to
mm,
be so
oh
light.
yeah.
The muscle is not really pulling. The muscle is like working endurance in an
Mm,
endurance fashion, but it's not working in a fashion where it's maximally trying to pull. So the tendon strain is going to be minimal because the muscle's not pulling on it that hard. Sure, you're able to hold it for a long period of time, but the longer it goes on doesn't mean the tendon is getting longer and longer. That's not how it works. It
yeah.
only works by how hard the muscle's pulling. So that's way down that spectrum. It's probably good for your muscle to
Mm,
do a 5-minute hold
mm,
because your muscle's gonna, it's good for your muscle.
yeah.
Probably good for your fascia, whatever else is good for. But I don't think it's pulling on the tendon to a point where the cells are going to be making the tendon adapt to anything. So then you move down to the 30-second ISOs, and that's a lot more muscle pull, but it's still not like a crazy amount because if you really want to pull on those cells as much as possible, you do like a 3 to 5 second ISO, which means, and this means you're going to failure all the 3 to
Mhm.
5, 30-second 5, you're going to failure. So you have to use a crazy load with that 3 to 5 second ISO. And that's just long enough to get a pull on the tendon cells where they start to kick out collagen and make the tendon a lot
Mm,
stiffer. I love the 30-second ISOs because if the tendon's very unhealthy, it does not like getting pulled on for 3 to 5 seconds with a crazy heavy load. Because I've had people blow up their tendons with 30-second ISOs,
mm.
patellar tendons. because I think the load is just too much.
Hmm.
And then I tell them they'll blow it up. So they'll do a 30-second ISO, which is supposed to be therapeutic and healthy for your patellar tendon. They'll do that. They'll come back to me next day. Their patellar tendon's blown up. It might be blown up for a week or two. And I'm just like, you need to go lighter. So they cut the load in half.
Hmm.
They respond good. They go up a little bit more. So that's kind of where I got it from, where if that tendon is really unhealthy, it doesn't like to be pulled on. It's probably more compliant. I don't know what exactly is going on in that tendon. I think it doesn't like being strained to that extent. So don't do the super heavy ones. Do 30-second. Sometimes I even give people 45, 1 minute, 2 minutes, because I want the muscle to get trained, and I want the tendon to get pulled on, but not to the point where you're getting a blow up of pain. So that's kind of where I look at that spectrum of like, I think it fits like this, where if your tendon is, you don't have tendon pain and you want that tendon to get stiffer for like a performance benefit, do the super heavy short isometrics, 3 to 5 seconds. If your tendon is in pain, it's going to be a lot safer to do the 30-second isometrics. And then if you want to try, like, I guess the 5 minute thing, I just do like iso lunge. The
Yeah.
iso lunge is good for many other benefits, but when you have, it can also be this benefit too. When you have a really blown up sensitive patellar tendon, you can do a 5 minute iso lunge. That back leg might be aggravating, because sometimes
Yeah.
that back leg on the kind
Mhm.
of hurts. But if you find a position that doesn't cause that, is like you can get a huge training stimulus, and that 5 minute isometric is basically laying off the tendon.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
training the associated muscles very, like, that is very difficult for the associated muscles, but you're not really straining the tendon. So it's just like a therapeutic thing. So that's kind of where my head's at with all
Hmm.
that, is the adaptation with the tendon comes from tendon strain. And you need a super big hit from the muscle to get tendon strain. You don't want a whole lot of tendon strain when the tendon's unhealthy. But I said I was going to question it, because I think there is also some maybe circulating chemicals within the body that can go to get to the tendon cells, and the tendon cells can kick out collagen by, I don't know what these chemicals would be, lactates
Hmm.
maybe, things like, so like maybe there is some roundabout way that the 5 minute iso lunge, because of all the buildup of metabolites,
Yeah.
maybe those have some effect with the tendon to get some adaptation. So maybe it is, in my head,
Mm.
strain is the big player. But I think also what's going on in the blood, I think that can also have some stimulus to the tendon to kick out and have some like mechanical change with the tendon.
Yeah, that's been something on my mind a lot recently, is that layer of like blood flow, or I've been calling it more just like an aerobic overlay, almost, just because track and field sprints and jumps and strength and conditioning, from more of the power perspective, it's kind of, you ignore, I mean, just everything that blood flow has, with aerobic piece, and even myself, just doing a little bit more, just from a general health, feel good perspective, doing a little bit more running. There's always explosive stuff. Like I'll run hills, then run a third of a mile, and run hills and run a third of a mile, and that kind of thing. Like I don't like just going out and running like 5 miles on the roads. I wouldn't feel good, but there's something about that aerobic piece and the blood flow that really feels good. And I've been using like BFR cuffs and stuff, and that always helps stuff to feel good. And so and I love, it makes total sense what you said, because I'll do a lot of stuff. For me, I do more with my Achilles and those types of things. High jump, maybe the result of doing 1,000,000 bounds and depth jumps and high jump for all those years. But like even just like standing on one leg for an extended period of time, I mean, obviously that's not a consistent pull on the tendon. It's just kind of like a occasional, like probably a series of gentle tugs, maybe depending on what part of your foot you're on, or some consistency. And then it's kind of a seesaw maybe of different edges of the tendon. I don't even know, but just doing like, if I just stand on one leg for 5 minutes, usually I feel a lot better the next day. And it's like, is it just, what was that, right? Like, and you got to think like, yeah, like you just said, like it's those metabolites coming in have to maybe have something to do with that, like versus just, yeah, I remember Kyle Wad said something about, I think it was when I was on his podcast. He was talking more about, I think, just like general pain issues. I don't think any specific joint, but he had said like an initial box was just to put them on the assault bike for 15 minutes to just like, just to kind of iron stuff out, get some blood flow, get things moving. It's just another overlay that's interesting to think about. I'm glad you brought it up before I keep rambling on about it.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I think it's neglected. I probably neglect it too when I talk about tendons. It's just talking about heavy loads and plyometrics and stiffness and everything. And it's like, I think if someone was in really good shape, like aerobic shape, they're probably going to be a lot less likely to have tendon pain.
Mm.
I would think
Mhm.
so, at least, you know.
Yeah,
But maybe this is
another.
a certain bucket of people because there probably are
Yeah.
people, marathon runners, you know,
Oh yeah, I'm
great
sure.
great
Yeah,
aerobic shape and they get Achilles tendon pain.
I'm
So it's
sure.
like maybe this is something where like I would think of myself if I'm not at a basketball court playing basketball, I get so much aerobic stimulus by playing 2 hours of
Oh yeah,
basketball. If I'm dunking alone, I get no aerobic stimulus because
yeah.
I just dunk for 30
Hmm.
minutes. And it's like if I did that 5 days a week, I'm gonna get pretty
Oh
beat
yeah.
up. But if I add in 2 hours of ball like most of those days, I'm a lot better off with my so I think the tendon stuff I just always come back to like good common sense
Hmm.
training is probably going to keep you away from a lot of tendon issues. And if I look back at all my tendon issues, it's just my own stupidity of time off and then maximum effort, or it's dunking every day through
Hmm.
pain. But it's been my way of learning about tendons. I wouldn't have the same understanding of
Hmm.
tendons if I hadn't gone through it so many times. But I think a lot of them just get avoided if you just like what I think looking at it from a deficit standpoint, what are your deficits? If you're aerobically just bad, that's a deficit. Let's address it, and
Yeah.
maybe that'll help.
Yeah. Yeah. I like, takes me back to like that deer in the woods or the animal that gets to play and the tendon health. And it's like part of that play is variability. But the other part is, like you said, you're playing ball. You're bringing in the aerobic system. And I find my body does different the next day if I do like something with an aerobic overlay versus if I don't, especially like you said, if you go dunk like 5 days in a row and there's not as much aerobic overlay, like even if I do, like if I go do, I like doing trail runs and like running on rocks and all this stuff. And I've done workouts where if I do like a series and I throw jumps into it, like I'm running and it's like, okay, this is a cool jump. I'll do this jump. And I do like, maybe I do 30 contacts of plyos, but it's in the context of running. Well, for one, all those jumps are like a couple percentage less than my maximal ability. But I always feel like almost no fatigue the next day, like zero, like given what you would typically feel for those plyo contacts, just because there's this constant like metabolic flush. It's kind of like basketball,
Mm.
right? And so, yeah, it's really interesting to think about that, and just good common sense training, like it's built in the system. It's like these answers are often built in the system. And I wanted to ask you this: so with the 3 second ISO, to go to this, like okay, 5 minute ISO, good for muscles, probably a rite of passage in many cases or whatever. You do a 5 minute horse stance to get in the dojo or 10 minute horse stance to get in the dojo. Then the 30 second and then the 3 second. Do you think that just from your experience, like it could easily get really complicated? Okay, well, I need this time and I need a force plate or something, or versus, hey, doing like 30 seconds and just doing like some heavy lifting, like some sets of heavy squats and stuff. I like where do you land with how these protocols come together for
Oh,
the
okay,
majority of
yeah,
people? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. For the tendon, so it's just strain is what you're after, and it's like the isometrics are going to hit it, but yeah, lifting's going to get it too. If you
Hmm.
lift a heavy load, like you could get strain on the tendon by doing a leg extension for 30 seconds, but you can also get strain on the tendon by doing a back squat.
Yeah.
You get strain on, yeah, anytime that knee is bending and anytime the quad is working hard, you're going to be pulling on that tendon. So I think they are pretty comparable. Uh, and yeah, I just don't, I don't know. I read a paper on just like 40%, maybe it was 60% loaded backs. I felt good because my cluster program is like 65%,
Mm.
75%, just 8 sets of 5 or 10 sets of 4. And I'm like, I kind of felt, I was kind of feeling, okay, is that like a good tendon stimulus or is it too light? And this paper was like, you're getting crazy, like big strains on the patellar tendon by lifting like a 60% loaded back squat
Mm.
because they put like ultrasound probe on the tendon. And it's like, yeah, I think you accomplish it. I think you can accomplish it with like lighter loads.
Mm.
And if you're a more beginner athlete, I think those 3 to 5 second ISOs are probably like the cherry on top for like a very advanced athlete.
Hmm.
But you can get it. You can get good strain. You can get good stiffness out of the tendon, gain out of the tendon by just lifting, period.
Yeah.
Just lifting, period. And I just love the isometrics because you can mess up lifting. How like if your knee is hurting, your patellar tendon is hurting, and you squat down and you bounce out of the bottom, that could kind of flare up your tendon. But if you get on an ISO and you just hold,
Hmm.
you're not likely to blow it up like that. It's just you just get rid of that dynamic component, and you can just get rid of the rate of loading. But what I wanted to say on the whole strain stuff and the cells kicking out collagen, I don't know if you have anything. Maybe you do have something on this. I was trying to look this up. Mechanotransduction. Um, so it was an old paper by Aaron Patsis, the guy who came up with like the Berlin method of 3 to 5 second isometrics for tendon stiffness. And they were saying, why 3 seconds? Like, why not 1 second? And it was an old paper. Now I can't find it. I tried to find it the other day. They said for the tenocyte, the tendon cell or fibroblast, whatever they want to call it, let's just call it the tendon cell. The tendon cell needed 3 seconds of stimulation to like accept or to get mechanotransduction to kick out collagen.
Interesting.
Because that would then say that's why plyometrics are not increasing tendon stiffness because they're so quick. The tendon cell is not receiving the signal to kick anything out. I was wondering too with muscles because like muscle hypertrophy, for muscle hypertrophy, you don't get it by doing a plyo, even though there's a lot of muscular effort. So I'm like, is there any parallel with like the muscle gets hypertrophy by a sustained time under tension, and the tendon gets collagen synthesis with a sustained time under tension? Do you know anything about mechanotransduction and cells and like time periods?
I don't know. I'm taking notes on what you're saying here. So
I want to figure it out. So it's like, yeah, why? Because the strains you can get with a plyometric are so high on the tendon.
Yeah.
But why is it not leading to any like significant adaptation?
Yeah.
And why is it only lifting that shows the response? And it just made me think of hypertrophy.
Yeah.
Because it's like no one's getting like significant calf hypertrophy from doing plyometrics, but they can get it from doing heavy calf raises.
Yeah. It's super interesting. And I think about even like, the old studies on vertical jump. You have the weightlifting group, you have the plyometric group, you have the both group. And the group that did both gained like 3 times as much. And you think about, okay, like you need both stimuli to optimize it out as to its full potential. I suppose unless you were just like a string bean skeleton that was just like built like a deer, right? Then maybe you don't need it as much. But most of us humans are going to need some level of strain. And yeah, like you said, like heavy weights, like it does. I do think the older I get, the more I just try to get in this place where I'm like, how little hairs can I split with this thing? Like if I can get it, just do some iso lunges and some squats and, like could that be good? Like, and then, I mean, granted, most of my focus these days is a little bit more about Achilles stuff, but even like calves, like when I was at Cal, they had the Kaiser jumpers. And one of the things I like to do on that for my lower legs was just, just drops, this one insane drop set. So I'd start with like, really heavy. Yeah, it was always heavy to light. Yeah, so I started with really heavy, like I could only do like 3 calf raises, and then you have the little button right there, so you just get to like take weight off. So I'm just taking weight off. My calves are absolutely destroyed by the end. Go sit at my desk. I'm done. The next day, tissues feel amazing, like bouncy. Like I feel bouncy. I'm like, oh yeah, so it's almost like a mix. You almost go through everything. It's like you go through you have the high strain, and then you also bring in the metabolites, and just did one set of that, but there's something even makes me think a little bit too about, you said lighter weight in the squat, like a 1x20 or something, it's like still do a good strain on the tendon, bring in metabolic piece. It's kind of makes you reconsider that a little bit in some respects of what's going on. I found that interesting. You said you didn't have to squat so heavy to get that through the knee.
Yeah. Well, the numbers of the strain are so like all over the place. They'll say like 4.5. We were talking earlier. It's like the Falk-Mersmann stuff is like get a elongation of the tendon 4.5 to 6.5% to get a like quote unquote anabolic response out of the tendon, and because they'll measure it with ultrasound. But then you take this it was Angel Bosses, something like this, Spanish squat, and they had 4 people do it, and their strains, it was like a 3-second Spanish squat. Their strains were like 18% of the tendon. 18, 12%, 10%, 6%. So it's like you have this variability with how far people's tendons will strain. Some people's tendons will strain, are super compliant and will strain like crazy. And then some people's are more stiff and they won't. I would like to know what these subjects were.
Yeah.
I want to know if that 18% was like someone who, I don't know, did they have bigger muscles than the person that strained hardly at all? Did they have I don't know what was going on, but it's like, Yeah, there's way too much variability with the way tendons are working. And yeah, one by 20 is like you probably definitely get some benefit there. Uh the plyos too, I'm like, what? I go back to you were talking about kind of submaximal jumping, and I'm like, I think it's the submaximal stuff is never really gonna risk that like blow up of the
Yeah.
tendons, but it's like those maximal ones. And I actually think, is there any benefit to the tendon by doing a max effort attempt on anything? Or does that just test the tendon, like test the
Yeah.
integrity of the tendon, test what you've built up over the last 20 years? Like going as hard as you possibly can on the tendon. Is there any positive training effect of that? And I don't think there is.
Yeah.
I feel like you get all the positive effect from the lifting volume, from the submaximal volume,
Mhm.
and the maximal effort is like testing day where you just wreck your tendon. You potentially wreck your
Yeah.
tendon if it's not built up.
Yeah. What do you think about speaking of plyos? That was one of the questions, and maybe we can kind of round down finishing with this because I think it's a really interesting thought. Is okay, like a max, like that Japanese high jumper doing the 6 foot drop and depth jump, right? Like a very testing the tendon situation. It's a short strain. It's not the stiffness quality of the tendon being built, like you said. But what about like extensive plyos, like jump rope on one leg for 2 minutes, or the rudimentary hops and ankle hops and those things done for extended period of time? Because I guess it's all quick, but then you bring in metabolites. Is that it?
I
Is there
know,
any?
yeah. Yeah, so it's exactly, it's like if it's all a quick time under tension, then you wouldn't get those strain benefits on the
Hmm.
cells. Like the cells wouldn't be synthesizing collagen and building up the
Hmm.
tendon because all the contacts are way too quick.
Yeah.
But then yeah, the metabolite thing comes in. So like, does that offset it? Is it like the metabolites take over and the actual mechanical strain is not the
Mm-hmm.
thing? Um, I don't know. That's kind of what I would think. But I also look at just plyometrics in general, and I'm like, what is the performance effect of plyometrics on the tendon? And I think it's getting the muscle to work with the tendon,
Yeah.
like the muscle and
Harmony.
tendon interaction. I think that's the main benefit of plyometrics is getting because it's almost like I look at the lifting. The lifting can build the muscle, the lifting can build the tendon, like the raw material of those tissues, but you need to get them to sync up together, which then if you're doing a plyo, you need a ton of muscular stiffness pulling on that tendon, like, interacting with that tendon. And if you never do plyos, you can have all the raw material in the world, but it's just not going to work that well. So I'm like, does is the raw material built with the lifting and then the plyos are I don't know. And then maybe age, like young kids, they don't build their tendons and muscles with lifting. They build it with movement.
Yeah.
And then older, I don't know what tendon book this was, but they were talking about the way to build the tendon was repeated flexions. That's what they said. Yeah. It's built with repeated flexions. So I'm like, how do you get the most flexions? Well, I'm going to get a lot more flexions of my Achilles with 2 hours of pickup ball than I am
Yeah.
with calf raises.
100%. Yeah.
So is it just the amount of times I pull on the thing? And then that's what's, yeah, I don't know. Maybe you reach I kind of feel like you reach a point when you're like 17 and you hit maturity that all of those things needed to be built. All of those repeated millions and billions of flexions should have been in place. And now you're mature and it's like we can start to bucket
Yeah.
things with
Mm.
let's do the heavy lifting for the raw material. Let's do the submax stuff. I don't know, for metabolites or
Hmm.
something, and
Yeah.
then do the maximal stuff to kind of like try to get those things to sync up. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think about, well, I was thinking about Stefan Holm and his like Achilles. They said it took like 4 times the pressure to deform it than the average person out the street or something. And I'm sure, I don't know what it would be relative to other high jumpers. Just looking at his lower leg, I would say probably stiffer, probably harder to deform than other high jumpers. But I don't think he started lifting really until later. Like, I think it was later, like at least 16 or 17 maybe, because his high jump actually had topped out at 2 meters 20, I think, at some point. And then he started lifting a lot more high performance. And I want to say that was like maybe, excuse me, like maybe 19 or 20, topped out and then started lifting. And then everything took off even more. And I know there's pictures of him jumping when he's just a little kid, like high jumping. And he's like 5 or something, going over some like bar into like just hurdling a bar in his backyard. So a kid who probably, so it makes you think, I don't know, maybe when you're younger and growing, just the repetition and but I don't. I mean, to me, it would make more sense. It would come from the intensity, just single leg jumps over and over, trying to be this thing, trying to do this thing, versus I'm just going to jump rope a bunch of times or something, And then, but maybe it was all of it, but plus intensity, and then later lifting, and then that maybe built on what he had. Or I guess from just a tendon perspective, it makes me think about long-term development. What's optimal, right? It's like don't add. It's like save the strain till you finish the base building, like.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and that's the thing too with the when you talk the 3 to 5 second isos is like if you have a weak associated muscle, what is the point of trying a 3 to 5 second iso?
yeah.
Like
Mm.
there's no point.
Mm.
Develop your muscle first by going through an endurance block and then you could endurance and then hypertrophy and then strength. But like if you take someone who take for example someone with patellar tendon pain where their muscle is weak and smaller, their quad muscle is weak and smaller, you're gonna do a 3 to 5 second iso on that side. They're gonna be so weak. Like let's lay off the tendon, let's build the muscle up. So I think there is like yeah, there is. I think there is levels to you need to address aerobic, and then you need
Mm.
to address like maybe what's it called? Is that block periodization, where you like do stuff like is that block periodization where it's like you start out with aerobic block and then
Yeah.
whatever it is, and
Get
then
GPP
max
phase,
strength
and
and
then
then
yeah.
power and then
Yeah.
speed. Maybe something like that exists for tendons, where it's like
Yeah.
if you really want to get the most performance out of your tendon, you need to address
Hmm.
all these things beforehand, which a lot of those are going to be muscular qualities
Yeah.
before you can even get that muscle to pull hard enough on a tendon. Because when you do like the 3 to 5 second seated calf raise, I've only really done seated calf raise, you feel like your calf muscle is going to pop. Like you feel
Hmm.
like that thing's going to explode. And I'm like, for me, I'm like, well, I know that's really yanking on my Achilles, but
Yeah. Yeah.
this is a sensation that is like feels dangerous. That sensation
Mm.
feels so dangerous. And um I guess that's kind of like the muscle hit you need to get some big pull on the Achilles.
Yeah. I do think there's something there with, yeah, like think of like, we talk about that periodization as it's outdated and archaic. And I think in terms of coordination, the nervous system it is. But physiologically, I mean, if you want to talk about probably having less injuries later in the season, like, yeah, it's probably something that's going to be, especially the GPP phase and doing a lot of movements and all that stuff. I do think that stuff's helpful. So it's in that sense, it almost would be a good thought exercise for exercise science students to make a training program. Okay, make this with the tendons specifically in mind. Make this one now with coordination of the nervous system in mind with the skill you're working on. Make this one with, you could have different ways of looking at it. So, but it is, yeah, it's always interesting to bring all those things, thoughts into the equation with that. Yeah, I feel like I had another question on the tendon or something that you said that related to something I was talking about, but maybe I don't. I know what I was going to say. Yeah, you said the muscle, like being limited by the muscle, because I found this with because I talked with Derek Hansen about this. I have a Tindeck, which is like a climbing isometric. It goes up to 500 kilograms, and I put it on the K box, and I'll do some single leg, like max calf pushes for 3 seconds to work on my calves and Achilles, which I do think was good. But I also think I got the same benefit. Generally, they all kind of gave me just a little something different, but I just like a lot of the longer stuff, more variable stuff for me. But I found that whatever I was getting on the graph, I could feel it was like whatever my nervous system just generally had to output that day. It wasn't necessarily that my calf or tendon was stronger. It was more I could send a stronger signal to that through all the other muscles pushing down, like even my knee and hip, because there's a little flexion. You don't just have your leg totally straight with that. I mean, you could, but I usually have like a little bend, just a little bend in the system, because then I can put more force in the foot. But I found that however high I was outputting was really just how strong my body was on the day, and then it was even like my shoulders shrugging up against the K-box harness and all this stuff. So it's kind of like the whole system strength being able to push and get this outcome on the tendon. But then you think of if you're lifting a heavy weight, it's like, well, now it's something external that you have to overcome. So that's unique too. And yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I found that when I was doing those pushes, and it was just interesting to see that happening where it wasn't necessarily just the tendon adaptation. It was also how much force I could just use with my whole body put down into that.
Yeah. And do you think having a higher output day was more stressful on the tendon?
I always felt pretty good after that, actually. I think
Okay.
I think a lot of my I would say it always felt pretty good. Like kind of the little like niggly stuff, even in my left leg, which is not the leg that struggles with internal rotation, even that felt better. So, but to say, was it better than any of other protocols that I do? I'm not sure, but I do think it was beneficial. For me, it was more like a time constraint. Like, okay, I got to go downstairs, got to turn on the machine, I got to turn on my screen, to see the outputs, and it doesn't take long, but when I have everything else to do, is just try to validate that versus something that's super quick is just stepping on a disc and doing like 50 quick circles or something. It's a little more time efficient. So to say, well, is this better than that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had all the time in the world, 100%, I'm going to integrate it. But it's just, I'm always just thinking about, okay, if I have this much time, here's everything I'm doing. Is this going to play a role?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, well, right on. Well, hey, Jake, I think we covered it all for the most part. So, man, it's great catching up again. I always enjoy these conversations, and they always make me think about, really consider that tendon piece. Like I mentioned, like the different tracks and the way you think about things. I always appreciate talking to you and hearing what you're up to. And I always appreciate how extensively you look into from all sides these issues, because I feel like every time all the questions I have are either resolved or alleviated in some manner. So totally appreciate the time, man. And yeah, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next week.